Welcome to First Line Compliance's Carefully Off the Cuff.
Hi, everyone. I'm Josh.
And I'm Ray.
And I'm Melissa, and you are listening to Carefully Off the Cuff with First Line Compliance. And today we are talking about buy downs. So, gentlemen, everybody and their brother is talking about buy downs right now. Why? Why are these things so hot?
Melissa, I'll jump in first. So I think it's kind of a matter of the market and where we are. Those are the prevailing issues. We've got prices for houses that are expensive. We've got interest rates that are high. And those combined factors make affording the monthly payment more difficult. So there's a phrase that's been used quite a bit lately: marry the house, date the mortgage. Buy downs are the reason. So the concept is, people are buying thinking they'll have the opportunity to refinance in the next 6, 12, 24 months. And so while they may need to qualify based on the full payment and the note rate, if their payment can be 2% or 1% a couple of years as it cascades down lower, what they actually cover in their cost and the long term of keeping the loan means they can actually get more house than they may otherwise have been able to pay for or afford.
So, with this, what do lenders need to be aware of when they are rolling this out for their people?
Well, let me take that. I think this is similar to many other things where you've got new products or even roll out new states. You always have to prepare for something new. In this case, we've got something with a kind of new feature. So I think there's some things that are different here and be aware of. The way I look at it is, you look at your operations, you look at your documents, you look at the requirements. So if you're looking at like your operations, you want to make sure you have the guidelines in place. You understand your investor guidelines and what the requirements are, and those could differ, and particularly when it comes to buy downs. So I think it's important that you get your handle around the guidelines and details themselves. I think it's important to understand your LOS system. And can it support this? And I think we've been so used to having 30-year fixed for the last 13 years. We now have to start thinking, well, wait a minute, can my LOS system actually do this? Can it handle this feature correctly? So where does the information go? Where does it flow? So I think that's something you have to test and see if it works and adjust your LOS accordingly. I think you need to understand really the pricing here. It's a kind of a unique product, and I think the key here is it is a pricing tool. So you have to be really, really familiar with the pricing, execution, et cetera. And I think people need to understand that. When I say people, I'm talking the whole company, sales, operations, everybody needs to understand that. When it comes to documents, I think something you really want to consider, and this is kind of unique, is the agreement. There's an agreement that the borrower is going to sign that indicates who is contributing to the payment, because this is what it's about. It's not about the note. The note is one thing, but there'll be a side agreement between the borrower and the other party who's contributing the monies for the buy down. You got to make sure that agreement is in place and that it works. Okay, so you can't just jot something down. You got to make sure, from a legal perspective and others, it works well. Of course, you want your policy and procedure. Make sure everyone knows what's going on. As I indicated, you really kind of have to make sure it's part of the DNA of the company. And then you get the requirements that you always want to be aware of. That goes back to training again, as you would tell. It's got to be part of the DNA of the company. You want to train people, show that you did everything you could to make sure everyone understood how the product works, how these features work, and do it correctly, including, the monies, how it moves, so on and so forth. And then ultimately, don't forget, there's the pure regulatory requirement. In this case, I would say things like advertising. Advertising and under regulations, it does talk about buy downs. I mean, for the most part, it's what you would think it is to make sure advertising is pretty fair and pretty clear. Understand that if we're talking about reduction in interest rate for 2 years, don't make it sound like that it's the low rate for 30 years. You really have to be fair in how you are going to advertise this and make clear that this is a temporary interest rate or something to that effect. So there's some things to pay attention there as well.
Let me just add a couple quick points, just to maybe highlight a couple that Ray spoke to. On the agreement, important that it's also signed by the party giving the contribution. So is it paid by the seller? Well, it's signed by the seller. I think that's important for a lot of reasons, not least of which is meeting investor requirements. It also, we don't always think through all the requirements, but there are certain states that are going to require identification of the buy down on the rate lock agreement. So have we thought through our disclosures, and have we thought through the rate lock agreement requirements, how this program or this feature ends up being disclosed downstream? Also, I'll kind of just highlight from Ray really highlighted the training piece. The custodial or escrow account is another. So there's a requirement that the funds for the buy down, the subsidy, be held in an escrowed account or a custodial account on behalf of the borrower. So making sure that we establish the account, that if the loan is sold or the servicing is transferred, that custodial account is transferred with it. Some of the technicalities to make sure we think through and build procedures and practices around.
Yeah, and I think just getting the math right the first time and always on that, I think, is really, really critical.
Huh. Okay, so math, numbers, money's not free. Where does the money come from for this in the first place?
Oh, it's magic, of course. So actually, look, it's going to come. It's pretty straightforward. It's either coming, and I'm going to tell you nothing. It's coming from the borrower or from a third party. Duh, right? It's going to come from somewhere. So really, someone needs to fund it somehow. So like the pricing and that kind of thing. But ultimately, someone does have to fund it, and most likely it's going to be a third party. I don't know, Josh, put more specifics on that.
These days, so Ray is right. There's like the philosophical answer, and then there's the practical, what's happening today. The more practical side is it's coming from the seller. Just given the current rate market, there really isn't a premium pricing market to allow the lender to offer a higher rate in order to cover the cost of the subsidy. That's also a little counterintuitive as well. I'm going to give the borrower a higher rate so they can make a lower payment for a couple of years. That just doesn't feel good. So the majority of time these days, it's coming from the seller. We have to think through, and back to the investor guideline point again, keep in mind, Fannie and Freddie, most investors will not allow the borrower to pay for the buy down subsidy. So it's got to come from a third party. So if it comes from the lender, unlikely. Comes from the seller, totally fine. There's a big part of the buy down market being paid for by the builder. So an important nuance or distinction, the builder of a new home is often the seller, but sometimes it's not. So if the contribution is being paid by a third party that's not the lender or the seller, we've got to be careful on the documentation and the treatment for things like points and fees and all the requirements for all the high cost and anti-predatory and other threshold regulatory requirements.
So everybody's favorite topic in regulatory anything is TRID, right? So like, where does this go on disclosures then?
Yeah, this one's pretty straightforward. Section H. It's an optional fee. It is not a charge required by the lender. It's imposed at the borrower's request or from this third party providing it. So it's a fee that goes into Section H.
Okay, but fair enough, and I think, you know, but the question everyone's dying for, is it a finance charge or not, right? That becomes money's coming in, so how do I treat it?
I even stopped myself on the answer to the last question. So the answer there is it's that this is deserving of a thorough conversation. Whether it's paid by the seller, it typically is not going to be included in a finance charge, but we have to look at under which test and for which purpose. There's a lot of different sections of commentary that come into play. So the don't mean to be tongue-in-cheek answer, it will really depend on a lot of factors.
I agree.
And so
I agree.
To discuss it here probably gets a little dicey because I don't know all the particulars of the scenario, but that's one we'd certainly love to talk through with people.
Okay, well, so that's really all I had for you guys, but is there anything else that you want to wrap up with before we go, or?
Ray, you jump first.
You know, again, I think most key here is to treat this delicately, make sure you understand the process well, doing the math right, your system support. I think that's really the key thing. And this is not just another ARM loan. This is different. And so you want to be prepared for that and make sure everyone in the environment is prepared for that as well.
I'll add, I mean, I think it's kind of in a similar vein. It's important to know this product. It's important to have the infrastructure set up to support the product. It's important to make sure that to quote my good friend Brian Levy, to have the narrative behind what you're doing and that it's consistently told from different departments and people who are communicating it. I also think, when I first started digging into buy downs or having this new cycle of buy downs entering the market, I was a little bit skeptical. And my thought was, well, why would we take money as a temporary buy down when it could be used to a discount point? But it really teases out, kind of back to the earlier points I was making, why is these happening? The longer term interest rate, the discount, if you're going to reduce say you have 2 points in premium, that's going to reduce your discount or your interest rate maybe 25, 50 basis point, 0.25%. On the buy down side, if your payment is 2% less the first year and 1% less the next year, and you're not going to have the loan beyond 2 years, there's a significant difference in the payment. And so there's a lot of who knows in the rate market. I personally kind of scratching my 8 ball. I think we're going to see rates increase before they drop. And then once they drop, the folks who have gotten these products are going to have to do the evaluation of, okay, how long is the rate likely to stay, and will I get the longer term recoup in a refi, or will I have this subsidy in the buy down and see what happens next?
And plus you get someone to make your payment, at least part of it. That's awesome in its own right.
This sounds like a really cool tool for loan officers to have in their toolbox in the market right now, where, like you said, interest rates are really high. Housing prices still haven't come down to pre-pandemic levels. This sounds like it could be a really useful tool. And thanks for all the information and great conversation, guys. And we look forward to hearing from everybody watching this. Like and subscribe.
Come on, Mel, it's subscribe, rate, review.
Subscribe, rate, review. But thanks,
See you next
guys.
time. Thanks, everyone.
See you
Thank
next
you.
time.
All right. Yeah.